We've got a very important week ahead of us, as this is going to determine what direction your team is going to be heading into the next quarter of fantasy football. And the reason I wait to do these videos on Saturday is so I can run through every single matchup with the updated injury reports that we get by this time. So make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support as I go through every single matchup here today. So going down to our first matchup here, the Jets at the Vikings. Actually, it's in London, so it's not in Minnesota. This game starts at 8:30 Central Time tomorrow morning. So make sure your lineups are set by tonight. So Justin Jefferson, obviously he's must start. There's really no reason to talk about it. The only thing I'll say actually about Justin Jefferson is I actually had somebody asking me, why didn't you even mention the fact that he's got to play Sauce Gardner this week? Listen, there's a difference between Sauce Gardner and what he does versus somebody like a Pat Surtain with the Denver Broncos. Pat Surtain is very similar to Darrelle Revis. You remember Revis Island? Yeah, that's because he used to travel with guys and he would lock guys down as a true cover corner would. Sauce Gardner doesn't even shadow guys a bunch of the time, and he's often just a big playmaker. He's not as good of a corner as Pat Surtain. So I'm just not worried about Justin Jefferson. Garrett Wilson, I still prefer him over Jordan Addison here because at least I get the consistent target share with Garrett Wilson. Now, I will say, Garrett Wilson is definitely a shaky flex option for me this week. I don't feel particularly confident about Garrett Wilson because this Minnesota Vikings defense has been putting clamps on every single opposing player, basically. They're so physical. But that being said, I will take Garrett Wilson here. And Jordan Addison, I think, is a good big play option, right? Jordan Addison, I don't really rely on targets with Jordan Addison. What you really want to take advantage of is the potential for a big play. And the Vikings are steamrolling everybody, so I think it's very possible that Jordan Addison does hit on a big play. So I would play Jordan Addison, and I think Allen Lazard is also playable as well. Allen Lazard, the last several weeks, he's actually been getting targeted quite a lot. The reason is because he's got rapport with Aaron Rodgers here. So when there's not something there between him and Garrett Wilson, he's typically looking for Allen Lazard. So I think Allen Lazard at this point is pretty playable option. And I'm not playing Mike Williams yet. There just hasn't been enough there. And of course, with the return of Jordan Addison, Jalen Nailor's a little bit irrelevant at this point. The Carolina Panthers at the Chicago Bears. Our next matchup here. Deontay Johnson is must start at this point. He's really risen up in my rankings for me. Look, the way that him and Andy Dalton have just connected, I mean, Deontay's a pretty decent receiver. And so when you give him a functional quarterback, he's going to be fine. Now, this matchup is not particularly great, but at this rate, the targets that Deontay is getting at this point, like, you can't realistically sit Deontay Johnson. And then DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, they're both flexible. I would say DJ Moore is definitely a tier 2 above Keenan. But DJ Moore is not must start. I mean, last week he got a touchdown that saved his week, but if you take that touchdown out of the equation, he's been pretty mid in fantasy football. And I just don't see a ton of chemistry being built between him and Caleb Williams. If anything, I actually think that Caleb Williams does better with Keenan Allen. So I just think that Keenan Allen is actually, for that reason, flexible, because last week he came back, got 3 targets, right? That was his first game back from the heel injury. This week, he got taken off the practice report, so he was full practice this week. And I think Keenan Allen, based on week 1, I think he's going to see an increased target share this week with another week back. And I think Xavier Legette is the last flexible guy. He's actually pretty close to Keenan Allen's here. I think that Xavier Legette is actually a pretty good big play guy. Now, Legette did drop balls last week, and he still doesn't look super polished or anything like that. But Xavier Legette, like, this is the perfect scenario with Deontay Johnson on the other side, because Deontay is the good route runner. He's the more crisp player at this point of his career. Legette's the big play guy. He can get in the end zone. So I do think that makes him flexible in a matchup where maybe there's more focus towards Deontay Johnson, and that leaves someone like an Xavier Legette open for opportunities here. So I would go Xavier Legette as the last guy, and I'm just not playing Rome. Rome with 2 games with Keenan Allen, he's got 1 target in each game. He's just not there enough. He's actually on the field a decent amount with Keenan Allen, but the upside just isn't there. So I'm not playing Rome Odunze with Keenan Allen there. Cleveland Browns at the Washington Commanders. Our next matchup here. There's not a must start in here, and Terry was the closest to being there for sure. My thing with Terry, I'm not putting him as a must start quite yet. Because with Terry McLaurin, what we saw in the first 2 weeks, it just hasn't left my image yet. So Terry McLaurin's a top 20 wide receiver this week, without question. And in fact, I would say in 75% of scenarios, I would say Terry McLaurin is a good start this week. But there is still opportunities and matchups for other players that we'll go through that I do think are better for those players than they are for Terry. I think Terry McLaurin, the way Washington's offense looks right now, everybody has their, the optimism. Everybody's got the rosy-colored glasses on because they think this offense is the best in the NFL. It's great. It looks really good right now. Some point, someone's going to stop them. I think Terry's going to be great this week, which is why he's my favorite flex of the bunch, but I'm worried about him. And then Amari Cooper, obviously my concerns with Amari are not from Amari. My concerns with Amari Cooper are, you play with Deshaun Watson, your upside just simply is just not very high. I mean, that's just the unfortunate reality with this one. So, Amari Cooper, I love the matchup, but, the Commanders have been sliced up by good quarterbacks this year. They did okay against Daniel Jones. Deshaun Watson's probably in that Daniel Jones class as a quarterback in the NFL, so I just don't really have tons of confidence in Amari, as much as a lot of people seem to have this week. But I do like him. I like him better than Jerry Jeudy, and I like him better than Luke McCaffrey, who I think is flexible this week. Jerry Jeudy at this point, I have to acknowledge, he's actually been okay in fantasy. He's actually been okay. If you want to flex him, go ahead. He's definitely not on the level of Amari for me. And then McCaffrey is flexible because this week, Noah Brown is out. Their second wide receiver, so that should definitely give Luke McCaffrey an increased target share this week. So if you want to play McCaffrey, fine, but he's definitely below all the other guys ahead of him. And obviously, Dyami Brown, I'll mention the name because of Noah Brown, but I just don't think he's going to get many opportunities this week. The Miami Dolphins at the New England Patriots here. Tyreek Hill is not a must-start. I mean, I am at the point with Tyreek Hill where I am searching for better options. I'm not trying to force him out of my lineup necessarily, but he's definitely not a lock at this point. Terry McLaurin, I probably play him over Tyreek Hill. That's how I feel about Terry McLaurin versus Tyreek. Tyreek Hill, the one thing that I come back to is last week in that game, he actually was so close to hitting on a big play, and Tyler Huntley just overthrew. So it's if he hits on that big play, that was a 70-yard touchdown pass. We feel a little bit better. We feel much better, actually. I think we feel a lot different about Tyreek today than we do at this point without him hitting that touchdown. So I would say that Tyreek Hill is definitely nervous. A nervous play for me, but I'm probably going to play him in about 75% of scenarios. Jalen Waddle's even worse. I mean, Jalen Waddle is do you have anything better? Amari Cooper, I think, is a better option. Jerry Jeudy, some may consider, and I think that's an actual conversation to have. Jalen Waddle without Tua, I said it before. This even happened. He was going to suffer the most, and I think he is. So Jalen Waddle, I just don't really see tons of upside. With that being said, big playability is still there with him. It's in there somewhere, so I think that you can play him, but I would say not the best play at all. And then you just don't play a Patriots wide receiver. They just do not provide you the upside. The next matchup, the Indianapolis Colts at the Jacksonville Jaguars this week. And Brian Thomas Jr. is really close to being must-start, actually. I actually considered putting him in here because Brian Thomas Jr., at this point, he's basically running away with the targets in Jacksonville's wide receiver room, and he just looks the best. He's looked the most consistent between him and Christian Kirk. Obviously, Ingram has been he's been out of the lineup. He may be in this week. So I think that ultimately Brian Thomas Jr. against the weaker Colts defense, who just got torn apart by George Pickens, I actually like Brian Thomas Jr. this week in a lot of scenarios. Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs, it completely depends on Anthony Richardson versus Joe Flacco. If it's Anthony Richardson, I don't want anything to do with these Colts receivers. I'd play Christian Kirk over both of them. But if it is Joe Flacco, Michael Pittman is honestly above Brian Thomas. I think that Michael Pittman was a great start, and I think that Josh Downs is a great start this week if it's Joe Flacco. The matchup's great. We just need to wait and see. It looks like a true questionable, but what I did read is that Joe Flacco apparently took the majority of first-team reps this week for what that's worth. So I do think that there's a legitimate possibility we do see Flacco again, which would be great for fantasy purposes with these receivers, but I ultimately do think that this is totally dependent on which quarterback they're playing with, and I prefer the backup. Christian Kirk, I think, is flexible. I just don't trust him based on one good week last week. I just want to see a little bit more before I put him over someone like Pittman or someone like Downs with Flacco. But if they do have Anthony Richardson, he's a better flex option than both of them. And Gabe Davis and Alec Pierce, I'm just going to go ahead and sit them. Alec Pierce, especially without Anthony Richardson, I don't think has a ton of upside. He's just a one-trick pony anyways. Gabe Davis just hasn't really done enough for Jacksonville for me to consider him at this point. The Buffalo Bills at the Houston Texans. Our next matchup here. Nico Collins must start. No need to talk about it. Stephon Diggs is must start. I mean, Stephon Diggs' role is so consistent in this offense. It's high percentage throws and red zone routes. That's what Stephon Diggs is feasting on at this point. So I think that Stephon Diggs is absolutely must start. Keon Coleman is the best flex option. If you haven't heard, Khalil Shakir is out of this game. So that puts Keon Coleman, in my opinion, directly in the limelight because Keon Coleman has continued to get more involved as the weeks have gone by. So with the Bills here, I don't have a ton of confidence in playing Keon Coleman or any other wide receiver for that matter, but he's my favorite of the bunch. And I will say Matt Collins is my shot this week personally. I think this week personally that Matt Collins is actually going to be the surprise play who gets in the end zone for the Bills. I think that Keon Coleman, I still prefer him. I think you'll see more targets and more good opportunities than Matt Collins will. But I actually think that Matt Collins is playable this week. It's a high-scoring matchup. I want options in this matchup. And then Tank Dell, I do prefer him over Matt Collins here. We're getting him back this week. There will be better weeks for Tank Dell, and it would not surprise me if this is one of those weeks. And I'm just still not playing Curtis Samuel. I prefer Matt Collins over Curtis Samuel because he's just been better. And he's been getting targeted more consistently. So I just don't really want to deal with Christian Kirk in my lineup and in a start-sit decision. Baltimore Ravens at the Cincinnati Bengals this week. Jamar Chase is my start. No reason to go through it. T. Higgins, I think, is a really high-end flex play this week. I think a lot of people are actually sleeping on T. Higgins right now. This guy had 10 targets last week, 6 targets in his first return week. So that puts him at 16 targets, 8 targets per game as far as he's played this year. So with T. Higgins, like, it's not just like BS targets either. Like, this guy has been in the end zone getting targets. It just hasn't hit yet. It's going to hit at some point, and the Bengals historically have done really well against the Ravens. I want options in this matchup, and that's why I'd also play Eushivas. Eushivas' role is really set in stone. He's serving that Tyler Boyd role for them. Just it actually potentially even better than Tyler Boyd has been the last like 2 years or so. So not a high-end guy. I'd play Zay Flowers over him, but I think Eushivas is a decent flex. And obviously with Zay, he was a big headline this week, and people are wondering what to do with him. Ultimately, like, his target share is safe. That's what keeps him inside of flexible territory. But his ceiling's low because he just doesn't see many downfield targets. It's just the reality with Zay Flowers. So ultimately, I do prefer T. Higgins over Zay Flowers. And then you go ahead and you sit Rashad Bateman. The Las Vegas Raiders at the Denver Broncos. No must starts for me. Listen, Jacoby Myers is my least favorite playable option this week. I'd play Courtland Sutton over him, and I would play Trey Tucker over him. The problem that Jacoby Myers is likely going to face is without Devontae Adams, Pat Surtain will be following Jacoby Myers around. That is a major problem because he's shut down elite wide receivers this year. Mike Evans, DK Metcalf, Garrett Wilson. Jacoby Myers is not in that class. So I don't think Jacoby Myers actually has much of a chance, which makes me want to play Trey Tucker more. If Trey Tucker's the big play guy, which he is, but he's going to have more opportunities this week, I actually like to play Trey Tucker more in this matchup than I would for Jacoby Myers. Courtland Sutton is my favorite guy because I actually think the Broncos could have a much better day passing. It's kind of hard to be worse than they were last week as far as Bo Nix goes. Sutton got in the end zone last week. He's definitely the guy who's the best receiver in that bunch, so I would play Sutton personally out of this matchup. I'm not playing DJ Turner, and I'm not playing Josh Reynolds. I just don't think there's enough passing upside in this game for either one of those guys. The Arizona Cardinals at the San Francisco 49ers. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a must start, and Deebo Samuel's a must start. Marvin sort of disappointed last week, but he ended up still playing pretty well in fantasy, getting you a pretty good game, got in the end zone, got some opportunities. He's going to be fine. Really, in most situations, like, I just can't ordinarily think of like a scenario where I would sit Marvin Harrison Jr. 90-95% of the time, I'm telling you to start Marvin. Deebo Samuel, I kind of feel the same way. Deebo, the first 2 games were really good with him. Last week was okay, it wasn't bad. But Deebo is still a must-start. Like, this guy, you haven't seen a ceiling game from him yet. So if you're new to fantasy football, you might be wondering, like, what's the upside with this second-round pick that I drafted in the offseason? The upside is going to show itself at some point. I'll take Deebo Samuel 9 times out of 10. Brandon Ayuk, I still do prefer him over Juwan Jennings. Opportunities are there with Brandon Ayuk. They just haven't hit yet. I think this could be a week where it does hit. I get it. He's looked bad. Like, it's not even just that opportunities haven't hit. He has looked terrible. He sucks, right? Like, it looks bad. I remember the player that Brandon Ayuk is. He was really good for them last year. He's been good for them the last several years. Ayuk's a good player. He's just not a wide receiver 1. So you're going to get hot and cold weeks from him. You've seen a lot of cold. So I think at some point he will get hot. And I think that Juwan Jennings, it's not that much farther ahead of him. I'd still play Juwan Jennings in a lot of scenarios. I think that he has obviously been playing better than Brandon Ayuk. So just based on that, I can understand where you're coming from if you want to play Juwan Jennings over him. I think they're both playable in this matchup, though. Michael Wilson is a low-end flex option. Inconsistent target share, and with this matchup in the division, the way Kyler played last week, it just doesn't look like he's able to consistently support 2 wide receivers, so that definitely makes Marvin must start, and nobody else on the Cardinals a must start. The New York Giants at the Seattle Seahawks here. DK's the only must start. DK, you do not sit him. He has been dominant for the Seahawks this year. Last week, the numbers don't tell the story in fantasy. That dude should have had like a 25-point game. The corners were literally tackling him last week as he was trying to catch end zone passes. So DK Metcalf has been dominant. You do not sit him. And then Jackson Smith-Njigba, Tyler Lockett. Yeah, I prefer them over the Giants options. I think that the Giants options here, Wan'Dale Robinson especially, is being overhyped this week. I think it's true. I think a lot of people will come away disappointed. Look, he's been target happy. I understand that. Malik Neighbors has opened up so much for Wan'Dale because he's a short yardage guy. And the reality is they're going to have to use him down the field this week. But if you look back to that week 4 game against the Dallas Cowboys, the one deep target he got, they could have won them the game. He looked like he didn't even know where the ball was. He's just not a great downfield wide receiver. So ultimately, I think Wan'Dale's overrated this week. I would take either Jackson Smith-Njigba or Tyler Lockett over him. And Darius Slayton, I think, is honestly not far behind Wan'Dale. I think that you're just as good taking a shot on Darius Slayton as you are with Wan'Dale this week. Because Darius Slayton actually is more of a downfield threat than Wan'Dale is. So I think that Darius Slayton, there's actually better opportunities with him potentially than there is with Wan'Dale. The only reason I have Wan'Dale above him is because he will see more targets. So that puts him in like range of getting like 7 catches for 30 yards or something like that. Malik Neighbors obviously is out of this game, so you cannot play him. The Green Bay Packers at the Los Angeles Rams. I think Jayden Reed, you have to put him in your lineup at this point. I've been saying all week, I think a lot of people undervalue Jayden Reed. This guy is a must-start. The ceiling he has with Jordan Love is so ridiculously high. I'm not sitting Jayden Reed, ever, under any circumstances. Dontavian Wicks is a high-end flex this week. Obviously, Christian Watson's out. Now, Romeo Doubs, doubtful in this game. He's not going to play either. So that puts Jayden Reed and Dontavian Wicks right at the forefront. And I will say, just a bonus tip, play Tucker Kraft in a lot of scenarios, the tight end for Green Bay. But Dontavian Wicks, I prefer him over Tutu Atwell this week because I think he has more big play upside. Now, Jordan Whittington, I've heard a lot of hype on him this week. I understand it, right? Like, he does get important routes for the Rams, but there's been a more consistent option here over the weeks, and it's been Tutu Atwell. So Jordan Whittington, until he outproduces Tutu Atwell, I just don't really have a ton of confidence putting him in my lineup over Tutu Atwell. I think they're both flexible, both playable this week, but I do prefer Tutu Atwell pretty decidedly. And then Tyler Johnson, Demarcus Robinson, their roles are going down, so I just don't trust either one of them at this point. The Dallas Cowboys at the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, the Sunday night game. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb's must start. You don't need to talk about it. George Pickens is the better flex option than Jalen Tolbert. But Jalen Tolbert, as a result of Brandon Cooks, recently, just before I started filming this video, getting put on the IR. Obviously, we knew he wasn't playing this week. But Jalen Tolbert for the next several weeks, definitely a good flex option here. He's already been more consistently involved in this offense They have Brandon Cooks. So I think that Jalen Tolbert is actually a legitimate play this week against the Steelers here. Now, George Pickens, I still do prefer him because he is the wide receiver 1 in Pittsburgh and Jalen Tolbert is not. So I do prefer Pickens, but I think they're both playable for sure. And then Calvin Austin, I got asked about him last week. I think he proved my point. You do not play another Steelers wide receiver. And one other thing I'm really confident in is Dak Prescott getting more than half a yard this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Their defense is good, not that good. That's his line on Underdog right now. And if you haven't taken advantage of Underdog yet, go down in the comments, grab that link that's there, and use code FN to sign up for Underdog, where not only will they match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 of bonus cash, you'll also be able to jump in on this free Dak Prescott line this week. And then our last matchup of the week right here, the Saints at the Chiefs here. Olave is teetering on like flexible territory. I do think that Olave is still a good start this week because the Chiefs here, like, this is going to be a tight matchup. I think Olave is what he is, and it's consistent, but it's just not anything great. But obviously with bye weeks, with injuries, a lot of scenarios I think that Chris Olave is going to be in my lineup. So he ended up being a must start rather than a high-end flex. I think Worthy's a pretty high-end flex. Would I play him over Dontavian Wicks? No, I'd play Wicks. Would I play him over Rashid Shaheed? Yes, I would. I would play Xavier Worthy over Rashid Shaheed. They're really, really close, actually, but I still prefer Worthy. Worthy is going to be put into roles they probably didn't want to put him into, so that may make him a little bit more inefficient, but the guy still is really efficient when he gets the ball in space. So I do ultimately just want a wide receiver attached to Patrick Mahomes, and Worthy has shown well on touches this year, so I do want him over Rashid Shaheed. And I think that my big surprise of the week also, in addition to Matt Collins of the Bills, I think that Justin Watson gets in the end zone this week. There's a touchdown in here somewhere. Not tons of volume going to be had, but I think that if you want to take a really deep dart throw, Justin Watson, I think, gets in the end zone. And Juju Smith-Schuster, I don't think is going to be relevant in this game. So let me know how your team looks in advance for week 5. And if you want to see where all these wide receivers ended up in my top 30 rankings, click on this video right here.